Folks want to know what you're doing now. Do you have any regrets from having stepped down? I know I hear from many people, and they say, only if Michelle Bachmann were still in there and she would stand up and speak up for certain things. But tell the folks what you're doing a little bit anyway, some thoughts you have about the future. Any regrets from stepping down?
Oh, goodness, no, not at all. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I came to know the Lord when I was 16 years old. I'm a simple person. The only way I know how to live my life is to listen to the still small voice of the Holy Spirit and hopefully obey. And the Lord called me into politics when I went into the Minnesota State Senate. He called me to run for Congress. I did. He called me to run for president. He called me out of that race, and he also called me out of the United States Congress. So I have absolutely no regret. In fact, when I got onto the airplane for the last time, leaving Washington, D.C. to return to Minnesota, I didn't know exactly how I would feel, but I felt great joy when I was walking down the jetway because I knew that I couldn't have worked 1 minute harder than what I'd worked when I was in D.C. I worked extremely hard. I'm so grateful, and I felt like I did everything that I possibly could with what God had given me during those important years in Washington.
What's the greatest impression you have from those years in Washington?
It was a tremendous time of change. As you know, I went into Washington. I was sworn in January of 2007. 2008 is when Barack Obama won as president. But the same year that I was sworn in Congress, that's also the year that Nancy Pelosi had the gavel in Washington. In other words, Democrat control of the House and Democrat control of the Senate. And we saw tremendous acrimony between the Democrats in Congress and George W. Bush in the White House. George W. Bush at that point, I think, was tired in his term, and I saw a real turning and shifting for those 2 years away from a little bit more of the pro-free market that we'd been seeing, and instead, I saw tremendous successes on the part of a Democrat-controlled House and Senate, and it concerned me. Like, for instance, that's when we had the United States government tell Americans that they couldn't buy ordinary light bulbs anymore. Now we were forced to buy light bulbs that government told us we had to buy, the CFL light bulbs, which had mercury in them and were actually very dangerous light bulbs. And I saw the beginnings of this very aggressive takeover of our government in our personal lives in a way that we hadn't seen before. And then, of course, in 2008, with Barack Obama winning the election as our next president, as we all know, 5 days before he assumed office, he said he was going to radically transform the United States of America. No other president, including FDR and LBJ, have transformed our nation in the same way that Barack Obama has. Unfortunately, he has transformed us away from a constitutional republic, which we are, and I believe that his greatest legacy will be the establishment of lawlessness in the United States.
Well, I'm going to return to that in just a minute, Michelle, and that topic of lawlessness. I'm going now to a comment made by retired General Paul Vallely, because I want to bring it back to you. Because some couple of years ago, now some 3-4 years ago, you were very outspoken in Washington about the Muslim Brotherhood. Paul Vallely, General Vallely, just recently said here in the last month, quote, radical Islamists have totally infiltrated the United States at every level, including the government, the military, the Department of Homeland Security. He says the Muslim Brotherhood is backing all of this infiltration, is spending the money to radicalize these people for cells in the United States. And he said that on America's Forum. You sounded a warning some years ago about Washington ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, and you paid a tremendous price for that, a terrible price. You were telling the truth. Would you do things differently if you had the chance to do that over again, or would you continue to sound that kind of a warning?
Well, I did continue to sound the warning. For the remainder of my term in the United States Congress, I never once backed away because I knew what I was saying was true. And ultimately what I was doing is asking questions, for instance, of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. She had an individual working for her that under normal circumstances couldn't have possibly gotten a security clearance. My question was, did the State Department waive the security clearance requirement? How did this individual get that right?
Huma Abedin, correct?
That's correct. And we asked questions of 5 different departments. We asked questions about the influence of radical Islamists, the ideology of radical Islam, and of the Muslim Brotherhood on these various departments. This, we obviously hit a nerve, because I don't think that there was a desire to have this information out in the public. Remember, this was prior to Barack Obama's re-election as president. Today, they don't seem to be quite as nervous about having the world know about the level of influence of Islamist-based groups in the United States. And I would refer to even this recent election of the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. And we heard that President Obama was very upset about Netanyahu coming to the United States to speak to a joint session of Congress, which I was privileged to attend. And he was upset because he said this may help Netanyahu in his re-election effort. But they weren't so worried about trying to defeat Netanyahu. And as a matter of fact, groups on the left, U.S. progressive groups, admitted in a panel at J Street, which is an anti-Israel group, a fellow who's named Bob Kenneth, who runs the U.S. nonprofit group Aminu, said in a memorandum in December that they were intending to do community organizing on the ground in Israel for the purpose of getting out more Arabs to vote. In fact, they were spending $3 million giving it to a group called Gavat Haviva. The organizers were consulting with President Obama's 2012 re-election campaign operatives, at least the top 16 in President Obama's organization. And as a matter of fact, these organizations also received your listeners funding from the United States State Department, including a group called One Voice, a group called Gavat Haviva, a group called Abraham Fund Initiatives. And even in February, there were efforts on the part of our State Department to bring in Arab mayors from Israel into the United States to meet with Democrat leaders and learn about political organizing to bring out more Arabs to the poll in order to defeat Netanyahu. And in fact, the State Department expedited these visas in order to be able to get them into the United States. They met with high-ranking American diplomats at our United States Embassy in Tel Aviv, and then they came to the United States. The Obama administration, before his re-election, wanted to quell or tamp down the idea of the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood and radical Islamists in the Obama administration. Now they're admitting it. It to the point of saying we're even spending U.S. tax dollars and doing community organizing through the State Department to defeat a prime minister in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu.